Introduction to testing in Mockito. So first of all, let's talk about why do you need automated tests in the first place. So automated tests are about confidence, having confidence in your code. So automated tests won't ensure that your code is bug-free. Well, they just cannot guarantee that, but they can guarantee that the features and code that you have developed already works as you keep improving or changing the code. So that happens all the time because, well, you've developed feature number 1 and you started working on feature number 2. It's quite likely that you will need to touch different parts of the system that involve the feature number 1 as well. And you're no longer sure if those changes somehow impacted feature number 1 and if it still works correctly. So if you have tests, an automated test, that means that it will automatically ensure that as you move on and as you grow your system, your code base, that all of that code that you've developed before is still working. And it might not seem like a lot initially, but when the systems grow really big, you're gonna start spending a lot of time, enormous amounts of time, just checking if the code that you have developed previously is still working. So that's why you need automated tests. So you will have confidence in making changes in your code base. And to do all of this, you will need to be aware of a few types of tests. So there are unit tests, integration tests, and end-to-end tests. So how do they differ? Unit tests are basically for testing single method or single class. And it means that they work in isolation and test one specific feature or its behavior. For example, how the string is transformed, or is this conversion correct, and so on. And since your code is developed not in isolation, not in units, and in the end it will have to work as a one big system, you'll need to test how does that code interact or integrate with each other. So for that, you will need integration tests because, well, as we have seen before, especially with our dependency injection framework, all kinds of classes have different kinds of dependencies, and to test all of that, you will need integration tests. And finally, you will need end-to-end tests. Well, and this is just a type of test where you test one final interaction from the end to the beginning, from one end of the system, meaning, well, client, to the other end, meaning backend, server, and so on, if everything works correctly. One thing you have to be aware of is that you will need to develop a lot more unit tests than integration tests, and you will have a lot more integration tests than, for example, user interface or end-to-end tests. And why is that? Well, because as you keep developing higher level tests, for example, integration tests, it means that we'll cover multiple parts of the system, and changing behavior in any one of those parts can result in a breaking test. So you don't want to spend too much time maintaining those tests. In the end, different types of tests will allow you to test the system from top to bottom, ensuring that all of this code base is still working as you intended, and ensuring that you won't spend too much time maintaining those tests. So Java provides multiple libraries to make the testing easier for you. So for example, for unit tests, we're going to use JUnit framework, which is basically just a test runner, a really simple framework. And we'll use Mockito to mock out dependencies. If we want to test, for example, some class in isolation, and if that class depends on the other class, we can use Mockito to mock out the second class. And then when we'll be working with integration tests, we'll use JUnit and Mockito, and we'll start using Espresso, which will help us cover the user interface interaction. And finally, end-to-end tests will allow us to test the top-level behavior, and for that we'll utilize user interface automator tool. So let's start with JUnit and Mockito. Well, let's just get to the code. And to make JUnit and Mockito work, we'll just need these two dependencies for starters. to include JUnit framework and Mockito core. And when we have this, we can start writing tests. So one of the simplest tests that we can have, this is an example provided by Android, is just testing if 2 plus 2 becomes 4. And obviously it works, it passes, so if I run it, it's just going to say, well, it's fine. And while it's still executing, while it's still building a project, we can see that this test, it's a unit test, and it resides in this test directory. So it's a bit different from Android test directory, which means that for Android test, these tests are going to be integration tests and they're going to be run on the actual device. And if we have local, simple unit tests, we can execute them on our machine, and thus they are in test folder. So that's one thing that's useful to know. Well, as we can see, the project compiled, the test is successful, while the second run is going to be just so much quicker. And for example, now let's take a look at our stock portfolio item test. So here we are testing if the item, when it received the last price, can get the right value. So it means that it has some shares. Well, we can take a look at the prepare portfolio item, a method that we created to prepare the mock data for us. So it has 10 shares, and if we execute this code, it should ensure that the return value of our item in our portfolio is 155. Again, a quick run ensures that the test is running. So one important thing to know is that whenever you write a test, you should ensure that it's failing first. And if it's failing, then you take a look at the code, what needs to be done to make it not fail, and then you make the change. As the next example, we can take a look at the view model test. So this time we'll be using Mockito. So as before, we are using JUnit to run the test, but this time we have a view model. We set up a view model from add new item, but this view model requires portfolio repository dependency and activity. So we don't want to test portfolio repository, we just want to test how does the view model work. We wanted this to make a single unit test in isolation. So that's why we mock out portfolio repository. So we prepare this view model, and then we can start testing. So one of the tests, whenever we call the method add new stock, we expect that portfolio repository has been called at least one time with the method save. And running this, well, it just ensures that the method is working. Well, just to make sure that the test is correct, we can go to add new stock, we can comment out the save bit. Well, and now the test should fail. And that's important to verify from time to time, so just to make sure if you are actually testing what you think you're testing. And as we can see, the test failed. So it looks like we are testing the right thing. And for example, in a similar case, here we tested after adding new stock and calling the method add new stock, we ensure that the finish method is called for the activity. So again, that can be done with Mockito. So that was it about Mockito and JUnit and introduction to testing in general. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at user interface testing with the Espresso.